Hi everyone, welcome to our second conversation of Saturday School for this autumn. So these talks are part of a creative lab for migrant organizers to imagine, embody and design for border abolition. And Saturday School has been rooted in a recognition that as we campaign and organize to mitigate harm from multiple hostile environments, we also need to be doing the designing and building of community infrastructures, economies, and relationships that we want, that replace borders, that much more compellingly demonstrate that borders are unnecessary. So this is a really difficult thing to do. It's a very long-term game, and these infrastructures, economies, relationships require us to get good at experimentation. So learning how to resource our experiments, sustain long-term experiments, and keep that future piece in mind. So the talks, we began with Daniel from Civic Square on Monday. We're speaking now to Noni and Guppi from Decolonising Economics, and Shana, a member from Interrupting Criminalization, to really ask these practitioners and to flesh out together, how do we experiment and how do we hold these really long and bold visions while building our futures brick by brick in the present. So that's the context of where we are today. So it's a total delight to have Guppi and Noni here with us, who are the self-proclaimed double trouble duo running Decolonising Economics. And Decolonising Economics work to divest from whiteness in economic and financial systems, facilitate a solidarity economy, and invest in the leadership of marginalised communities of colour who are organizing towards community ownership of assets. Guppi is a senior consultant strategist with over 15 years experience in economics, health and climate issues. And Noni is a multidisciplinary artist, organizer and educator. How are you both?
Wonderful.
Yeah, really, we had a great lunch.
That's very good. So you're all nourished, you're digesting. So whilst you're digesting, let's just kick off the conversation and I really like this question, and I asked it with Daniel, and I think we should ask it with Shana as well in our next one, just to understand how people have gotten to where they are. It would be so great if you could each answer, tell us a bit more about what have been your journeys into solidarity economies work and into setting up Decolonising Economics.
I could go first. We were talking about how we're just going to do this for the entire talk of like...
We're going to like lift our eyebrows at each other.
I guess for me, I grew up in Zimbabwe for like the first bit of my life. And I was raised by my grandma, and she was just like a really like busy woman. And she just had a lot of things going on, and she would just like organize like her community. And she would just like always like be like doing some form of like entrepreneurship. She had a garden, she had like a saving circle with her friends. She knitted jumpers, and like it was just like I think I learned a lot from my grandmother about like what it means to be like resourced, because that was something that she was really like worried about in her life. And in her lifetime, I think her whole just job was to making sure that we were resourced and like we had everything that we needed, and the way that she organized that. And then when I moved to the UK and sort of realized how like I guess in the UK in comparison to Zimbabwe, like you're kind of alone and you just have to just figure out stuff by yourself quite often, especially as like a migrant. And I think in that experience of just like from being in like quite a tight-knit community where like you always had someone to share stuff with, you always had like support, to being like sort of like within a system where it's like you're individually responsible for all your outcomes, and like sort of like matching that those two experiences up in my mind. And then, yeah, just randomly, I remember like the thing that really shocked me, I was 16 and I had like a teacher who told me about Marxism, and it was as if like he just like told me the best thing I've ever heard. And I was like obsessed. Like I literally just was obsessed, would just read about it all the time. And then I started like sort of having an interest in thinking about like, yeah, like what does it mean like when there's the ideas of class, and how can like the class struggle like liberate people. And so yeah, I was just a bit obsessive about like Marxism. And then I came to like uni and I realized that actually it was really important to talk about class as well, because like lots of people who were organizing around Marxism were like quite intellectually type people who most often didn't necessarily have the lived experience of class. And therefore, like the whole idea that one day, like the class system is just gonna fall apart, there's gonna be a revolution. And like the whole idea within Marxism of that, like once the class system falls apart, then like the whole world will be fine, which I thought was quite interesting, because like, you know, they basically think that like race and gender and whatever doesn't really matter as long as class is fixed. But then it was actually that not true in my communities, whereas class and race were just tied together quite often. And so yeah, just started like organizing around that. And at the same time was like teaching kids around like understanding like what structural inequality was, and just realizing like the importance of talking about resources, talking about class, and like how you teach people to feel like they are part of a man-made system, and like what alternative ideas could be there for creating an alternative like economic system. And then yeah, started organizing at like a quite mainstream new economics think tank, and felt really frustrated because like again, like the whole idea that the economic system will just fix itself without any mention of like structural inequality, racism, colonialism, slavery, and was just like, I just couldn't make sense of those two things. And actually I'll pause there because then it can intersect with how me and Guppi met.
The story continues. Yeah, I think maybe along the same themes around grandparents, and Nonny and I were talking about this at lunchtime, just how pivotal the period of like my early mid-20s to my mid-30s were. Like my grandfather passed away in 2010, and my grandmother lived for just over a decade more than him. And when he passed away, it was really like the time that I actually began taking interest in him as an individual person. And really the only way I got to know him was through reading his diaries and understanding him as an organizer within the kind of London Punjabi community, and what it meant for him to move in the 1950s and start life here, and just what I sort of sense of my grandparents in their kind of very DIY nature of sowing sag seeds from Punjab in their back garden, and you know, just their general practice of existence within their tiny home in South Harrow. And that being such a big part of that decade, and now, even after my grandmother's passed away, but integrate, like it really forming quite a shift in my economics practice. I came to economics whilst failing medical school in my first year. And it was a result of reading like a little booklet that was written by a group of radical public health academics under the sort of banner of the People's Health Movement, this incredible globalist network of health justice organisers from around the world, and just learning about neoliberalism basically, and then sort of like learning further about capitalism and racial capitalism. Although that was quite cognitive, I spent that time really trying to integrate that into my practice of organising. Again, like Nonny, found myself in unbearably large number of mainstream economics organisations. I was going to name them then. I'll name them later. And to the point that I think it was 2017, after writing a short article, was invited to run a workshop based on the kind of colonial roots of the economy. And a mutual friend of Nonny and mine called Sophie sort of encouraged Nonny to be in touch and said, oh, why don't you just get in touch with Guppi and run this workshop with her? And we did. And we did it in the East India Docks in London, which is like, I feel so like poignant location. And that was in 2018, and we've been running workshops in that theme ever since. And really the introduction to solidarity economics came more at a kind of like strategic rather than kind of practice level, kind of strategic in Decolonising Economics purpose and development, through trying to I guess not push, but like articulate and advocate for this idea that solidarity economics is an inherent form of organising resources and relationships, that it is within the cultures of so many people, the global majority, that it's not a new form of economics, like as you know, the policies and structures always try to push us into new ideas as alternatives, but yeah, like within the kind of like spirits and souls of our ancestors and our own beings, and in our relationship with the land and all other natural elements. And yeah, advocating for that through organising with other Black and people of colour. And we can talk more about that for the rest of the session.
Amazing. I love how grandparents have centred so strongly in the roots of where you now are. And yeah, to have intimate experience of someone in the family that is knitting, doing a saving circle, is busy trying to think about resourcing, and then a grandfather who's a community organizer, growing seeds, part of like a major change in society in the UK at that time. So those are like really, really rich histories that we all have. And yeah, like you said, nothing is new. We're not creating a new economy. We're reclaiming, in part, like the spirits and souls and wisdom and guidance of our ancestors. That's really beautiful. And it also, I think this leads on really nicely to the next question, which is, you know, you've gone on this journey, you met together, you have called each other soulmates previously. What does the future look like for decolonising economics? And I know you've used the language of a Black and people of colour led solidarity economies movement in the UK. Can you just paint a picture for us? What would that feel like? What would that look like? Yeah, give us a taste.
I guess one of the things that I think we love to go back to is about just looking backwards to kind of look forward. And I think what we were saying before about like we are from like lineages of people that have been doing Black and people of colour led solidarity economics movement without necessarily calling it that. And I think especially in the UK, there's been like such a rich history of like organising that's happening around like communities meeting their needs and like independent of the state, and also like communities like I think there's something about like the vision we have is that everyone can have an active role in shaping what the economy looks like. And also the idea that there's so many economies that exist as opposed to just like one, which is what like capitalism would have us think. And I think a vision is that we have is like, people practicing what their needs are on a community-based level and like making collective decisions together around what that looks like. Or like, you know, for example, like what if a whole community of people in like a neighborhood decided that they wanted to change the way that they like eat food in that local area and like growing food together, like cooking together, and like what are the processes that meet our collective needs that we can do together. I think it's something that we're really, really interested in. That's one thing it would feel like. And I guess another thing that we think about as well is like the vision that we have is one that is sort of rooted in healing, with the idea that like a lot of Black and people of colour have a lot of like trauma from like colonialism and like the ways in which that impacted like our bodies and minds and like our togetherness. And I think another vision we have is like ways in which the economy can heal, which always feels like a bit like, I think, yeah, when we started, I don't think we used those words to speak about healing, or something that sometimes feels quite like intangible or like not real. But then how do we make healing like real and material is something that we think about a lot. And like the vision that we would have is like, yeah, for, I don't know, we love sauna. So if everyone had access to a sauna all the time, that would be amazing. And that being like collectively owned and collectively governed based off of our relationships as well. Yeah.
And you're asking about, in that question, like what that means for decolonizing economics in its future. And I think we've always thought about like not just the direct organizing, which we have been doing for the last few years, but also understanding that many of these systems or structures that exist at a community level are often like survival mechanisms and forms of sort of solidarity actions and mutual aid, but are and can exist as kind of inherent practices within a set of economies, and can be sustained if the kind of conditions or infrastructures around us enabled it and enable them to be either like replicated or sustained more effectively, and really bringing in the sense of, yeah, like longevity into those practices. And we think a lot about how to hold relationships together, and relationships being also like a large part of the healing process and supporting each other. We were just talking about a few folks who are part of the Nourishing Economics program, and just like having been seen, like the transformation that occurs after having been seen, and how essential that is as part of the healing process too. And yeah, there's like many visions, you know, that are kind of multiple, and including like dismantling structures that are continue to accumulate wealth in large numbers. I think maybe for us specifically the philanthropic sector, but also like skilling up. So like we have an event next Wednesday with Claude Hendrickson on community-led housing and land trusts, and just like what are the options for folks around community ownership and community self-governance at a kind of like more structural level, as well as like investing a lot of resource and consideration into the relational practices between us, so that the structures that emerge from the solidarity economic practices really reflect the principles of solidarity economic organizing, which feels really important.
Amazing. And it's actually really refreshing to hear a vision said in so many different simple ways. It's like, how can we practice what we've always done? What is the collective decision making around a community's needs? How can the economy heal and make healing tangible and real? If this is the vision, which I feel is so exciting and possible, what is the experimentation that you are doing to work towards this vision? And I know when we last spoke, we talked a bit about program and also the structure of your organization. And I think it's good to like really focus on those two things because they're meaty. But yeah, how are you experimenting? And maybe first talk about the program of work and activities and community building and networking that you're doing.
Should I start? I'll start with the program. In 2019, we just had like this idea of like bringing together people, because what we noticed in our during our work was that like there were so many amazing Black and people of color organizers who were doing great experiments in the solidarity economy that didn't, one, think of themselves as working within economics, or two, didn't necessarily, like they were doing, yeah, they were like separate from each other, and we're like, how nice would it be to bring everyone together and be like, hey, you're all doing the same thing, even though it looks different. You might be an artist, you might be a writer, you might be a food grower, but you're still working towards the vision of a solidarity economy. And so we created the Nourishing Economics program, and the Nourishing Economics program was like a year-long set of retreats. So I think we did 3 retreats across the year where we brought people together to just sort of like gather. So we kind of divided it into 3 themes. So the first one was just like, what happens when you bring people together to rest? Because there was like a recognition that you can't really experiment or like organize when you're really burnt out. And lots of people in our community were really, really burnt out. So on the first one, we rested, we did some karaoke, and we just got to spend time together, eating and like cooking together. And I guess that is also an experiment in like, how do we co-create the spaces that we are together, where everyone feels like mutually like responsible and mutually a part of something that we're like co-creating together. And then on the second one, we were thinking about like the intergenerational conversations, because actually lots of the experiments that we're thinking about doing now have been done before. And like, what is it, how can we build a bridge between the information of things that happened in the past and in the current, and like how can the different contexts teach us about how like racial capitalism changes, and like the tools that we need to be able to change those things. And then the third one, we're thinking about like the infrastructure that supports the communities to organize and to organize effectively, and like experiments around like sharing like an accountant, or sharing like like the things that every organizer needs but is sort of figuring out by themselves. And so from that, we sort of like, we also had 2 pots available to people for resourcing, because lots of people are doing this work underfunded, under-resourced. So we had one where it's like about meeting your individual needs, I guess, that support you to organize. So during that time, like, you know, the cost of living crisis was getting really hard. And so people could put in like claims to like support with like their energy bills, or like to support with like seeking therapy. And then we had another seed fund where you could just like write an idea and then share it with the rest of the group, and then to help you to make sure the idea would happen. And then we would like resource you like a small seed fund for you to grow that idea. And I think from that program, we just like learn a lot about how the different ways in which experimenting in solidarity economy looks like. So I think, for example, we were speaking to one artist like Jacob V. Joyce, who was saying how they wanted to start like a tool lending library, and how like that tool lending library would mean that less and less people are going to like spend money like buying expensive art materials, when there is like a library where you can just go and like get it without paying for it. Or on the other side, we had people who were like setting up workshops, and like, you know, the idea that you can just go for a walk and like be able to connect with nature, and that be an experiment in itself too. And I think, with the retreats, it was such an experience of just the vastness and the diversity of solidarity economics initiatives. But I think at the moment where we are is like, we have all of these amazing, great ideas, and like the sort of organizing that people are doing with their seed funding. And I think we're in this moment of just wanting there to be more resources so these people can like set up, like, I think one person was thinking of setting up like an energy cooperative, and like how great of an experiment that would be. And also, how do people do that together? It was also really nice. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've forgotten, but I'll just maybe pass over to Guppi in case, and then I'll think of something else.
I feel like you should talk about about medicine as well.
Yes, thank you. I'd forgotten. So another one is we're doing a collaborative project with Kinfolk Network, which is about like thinking of creating like a Black oral histories archive of economic thought and practice. Because there's the idea that like, what is theory and what is thought in our communities, as opposed to like white Western, what's it called, epistemology, I never know what those words are, ontology, but and like thinking about like, how can we like think about economic thought is in like music or in like food, or and then what are the tools that are needed within like communities to create like solidarity economics based off of the past. So we're doing like one event on like saving circles, and like bringing together aunties to talk about how saving circles have helped them in terms of like self-determining when they move to the UK. We're doing one on like food sovereignty and like seed swaps and like the history of seed swaps in like the UK. And there was another one. I keep on forgetting the third one. Yeah, we're doing a couple of different experiments where like people can come out and like try them, and then we're going to do like a year-long community of practice. So we would love to see like people setting up like saving circles or like organizational saving circles. Like what if we were speaking to Debs from Multitude, who's thinking of setting up a saving circle for like tech infrastructure. So like if like one organization maybe can't afford to have a new website, how can collective group of organizations pull money in that can be spread out to the movement, and thinking about ways that, yeah, we can experiment to strengthen all our different liberation efforts. Boom.
And I'll just talk a little bit about the organisation structure. We were flirted with the idea of setting up as a co-op, and then that was sort of just before, maybe through the pandemic, and in 2020 and 2021. And then we quickly realised that, like, even as a cooperative, you're still accountable to the Financial Conduct Authority and Co-ops UK. The purpose was to sort of build a significantly more like democratic organisation, and it just didn't feel that was really reflective in the legal structures and all of the responsibilities that come with the reporting, and just being two people working 2.5 days a week didn't feel like that would work for us. So we decided to become fiscally hosted, and I think it's I'm always surprised at how few folks consider fiscal hosting as an option, but just how much it enables you to be in this sort of transition of like setting up processes without having to set up like every process at the very beginning, but still enabling you to access funding. And that's where we got our first bit of funding, which meant that we were able to, just like experiment a bit more with how we wanted to exist as an organization. There are like many things that we do as a kind of like daily or yearly practice. Maybe the first thing to mention on the Soulmates part is that Nonny and I have relatively regular, I'd say like once a quarter or like 3 times a year, couples therapy sessions, and we spend like either a day or 2 days with our facilitator, kind of going through organizational dynamics and culture and our relationship, because we spend a lot of time together and with like demands going on from like all sides of our life, and that feels like a very important and grounding experience. And then we also begin the year, we do like quite regular strategy sessions, but being held by Sophie, who is very much part of the team now. Sophie's like I just think like without Sophie, we would fall apart ultimately. So like having someone who like really holds you together, and I'm not really sure how to describe her role, because it's not operations, it's like skeletal, like real skeletal management, and like, but also like muscular and ligamenty as well. Like there's a fluidity to our work as a result of her involvement. So like Sophie, leads us through our kind of year planning. We're really seasonal in our practice. So we know normally like in the year when we're going to be quite busy, and then we intentionally take all of August and all of December off to ensure that we get like a decent amount of rest and like step back from work, and just like don't think about work, and that really helps. We pull tarot, not as regularly as we used to. Like we used to do it every week, but we definitely do it as a kind of calendar for the year. So we pull the tarot for the year to just see what was coming up for DE month by month. And we think about astrology a lot in the kind of energies that exist around us, and it's influenced a lot of definitely when we had no money. It influenced a lot about like how to feel, whether to feel committed to and patient around like what we were doing. I think there was a time where we basically were without funding for like 8 to 9 months, and it was really Nonny who was like, just stay with it for a bit longer, and like stuff will come through. And like sure enough, within 2 months we got a grant. So just kind of giving us a sort of certainty and reflection of space. And and we're really like, I can't remember who it was, but someone said that, you know, your budget is a reflection of your values, and we have a lot of useful ambiguity in our budget. So we have a big section which is like miscellaneous project spend, and that has been incredibly helpful. And then we have another budget line around accessibility, which of course like meets many needs, and particularly in the last year with the retreats, it's just really supported us to like meet people's needs where we had, you're never going to anticipate everyone's needs, and also like context change. And so just being able to adapt, but with the resources, rather than having to negotiate at a time where you're trying to ensure someone feels safe, and can trust you. And I think that was quite good feedback we got, which was, yeah, just like genuinely being able to be there for folks and not having to create a sense of scarcity, which then really like rubs and thins the relationship as well. So we were really committed to not entering into the program work until we knew that we had significant resources to be able to like flex if we needed to. And I think there's probably more on the program that we could say around like how essential food was, and we had some kind of like, you know, Sophie recently practiced as a masseuse, so provided massages for people. Nonny mentioned saunas, and we made sure that we had a hot tub at one of the events, just as much as we could, basically, like as much niceness, which is like not just nice, but really like allowing folks to be in their bodies as much as possible in the presence of one another, and reminding them that that is a safe place to be with each other, which takes like a little bit of moving out of where we believe ourselves to be in our minds, and actually like feeling like materially feeling different, I guess.
Thank you both. I feel like you've managed to really describe the wholeness of how you experiment. It's not only these incredible, and I have to say incredible programs that you're producing and facilitating, and weaving generations through, but it's also how you're doing it together as a couple. And I am gonna seek out couples therapy for Rosalie and I. But yeah, the culture of how you think about the structure of the organization, the fiscal hosting, the ambiguity of budgets wherever possible, that's super important. And I think when we last spoke, you also really talked about intuition, and that maybe comes with, you know, the astrology, the seasonal approach of working together, but like just trusting and having a sense that the right person and the right invitation will turn out. And I loved this. Yeah, I just loved how you described, oh, you move towards a vision in a very intuitive way. And I don't think I've heard people talk about it. Organizing as intuition, but I love it. And I'm trying to lean more into that now, rather than hold on to my Capricorn tendencies, which is the master plan and the multi-sheet Excel, multiple-sheeted Excel file, whatever you call it.
I think it might be worth saying, you know, we didn't always operate like that. So there was a definite period in the first 4 years where we were really like completely under, basically non-resourced. And so the intuition was there. And it was also maybe when we started working more closely together on a more regular basis in 2020, we were also distant. So we were doing it over Zoom. So this thing around like co-regulating our intuition over Zoom was like really, my partner laughs a lot about, or like teases, not laughs, about how our meetings are 50% check-in, 50% check-out, and very little like in between, because we had to spend so much time getting a sense of where the other person was, and we come from very different spaces, and so really like the time to invest in how to like intuit together where we will experience and feel something very different, also from being like quite distant from each other physically. And I think it is really a practice of like being in the same space as much as you can, even if it's online.
I feel like it's like the vibes as well, because I think as like Black and people of color, there's just a lot of vibes that you are experiencing all the time. And I think like we kind of had this period where we were like had some like quite difficult experiences of working with like white organizations, but then we both would have like a sense of like a vibe of just like, did we like that, did we not, how was that a bit weird? And I feel like that experience really shaped the ways in which we want to keep everyone safe and keep ourselves safe. And I feel like therefore our intuition is quite like turned on to like pick up anything that might like make us not feel so safe. And I think it's such an important thing as like Black and people of color, like organizing within this world, to just have that to be able to speak to that feeling that we're told to like sort of repress quite often. And I feel like that's a really big part of our organizational strategy, sensing the vibes. It's huge.
Love it. Speaking about safety, I wonder if this is a good time to raise what are the ingredients for convening people in safe and supported and resourced contexts to experiment. And I wondered if you could speak about working with visibility, invisibility, and the danger of co-option.
Where to start? I think, I feel like one of the things that we have been reflecting on is that, like, historically, lots of very outwardly visible, like, radical organizing has always had sort of like drawbacks. So it's either you experience violence, or like you are co-opted. And I feel like that's something we think about quite often. And I think around like organizing in like 2020, it was like everyone was quite isolated, but then there was also this feeling of like, we want to be visible for the people that we want to bring into our safe space, but then also we don't want to be like too visible in the ways in which we might end up being co-opted, or like being part of something that we actually don't really like believe in. And so I think we've been really straddling the two for a really long time of like, well, we should post more on Instagram, but then also we just don't. I mean, we try to when we have events, or like, and I think what we do is we organize on a relationship to relationship basis. So lots of the people that we organize with have like, we've maybe met up with, or like we email, or we have like that connection before, and like that's like the foundation. And we're very open people, so like people come to our events, when they like come and meet us, we like want to strengthen that relationship. And I feel like it's that what creates that sense of safety is like the invisible threads of connection that are not necessarily observable in like the world. God, I feel like I'm speaking so like in such immaterial language. But yeah, I think we really love in-person meeting and like building the connections that we have with people. And both of us actually, we have backgrounds as like grassroots organizers. So we go to places, we chat to people, we find out about what they're doing, they connect us to this other person. So I think we are like really, we have visible roots like across the UK, but then we're not like with Black and people of color. But I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but yeah, we just love relationship and one-to-ones. Yeah, Guppi, you add, because I just, I don't know.
I mean, it's sometimes hard to vocabularize the magic. I think it was basically like 2 years we were talking about doing the program. So the folks that we knew wanted to come on it also knew that we wanted them to come on it. And there was, this kind of long period of like, we're really going to do this, but we haven't got enough money just yet. We like want to make sure we do it properly, and just like finding the right time to do it. So I think that the speed at which we decided to do the program was really important as well. Just again, with the ensuring we had all the resources, but also like, there is just something about it being the right time for us as well. Again, like Nonny and I were just reflecting on how 21, 22 were just like very awful years for both of us. And if we were to have run the program any earlier, it would have been a disaster. Like there was so many other things going on. We both lost our grandmothers. Like, you know, there was just like other personal things happening. So it just wasn't, it just wasn't the right time. And I think maybe one thing that we felt and sometimes feel is, particularly from mainstream or white organizations, is this like kind of like icky, like, oh, you're doing a really cool thing, let me be part of it kind of energy. And that turns us off. So what we actually have a very old document from 2020, which is like the red flag document, which is like, if someone comes to us with these characteristics, like we will just like say no, because we wanted to be able to articulate like that feeling of like, this is not right. And it's often the slightly like more effortful relationships that have become so meaningful, like both, you know, like multiracial, so like not just like with BIPOC folks, but also with BIPOC folks who came on the program, or just like folks that we're partnering with now, where it's just taken a bit of time to like nail what the partnership is. And we might know each other, we might like, have a relationship outside of work for some reason, but to like actually get to a point where we're like, okay, this is the thing that we're supposed to do together. And just to trust that it's for it to not ride on, I guess, an energy of like a particular energy that feels like, oh, this seems cool now, so we should do it. More like we've really thought about this, and we all feel in the right space. And I think in terms of like, not being visible, a lot of the stuff we find it really hard to articulate and like to our funders, because you just like, we can't tell you what's going on. Although if you come back to us in 5 years, you will see what's happened. And I think that's the hardest thing, is like justifying the significance of relational organizing and the time that is necessary. Like really, if we've been doing this since 2020, then our relationships are very young, and you know, will materially not look like anything until 2027. Who knows, you know.
And also it makes me think, when we did our big event in the summer, it was so wonderful to see people that had literally never ever met each other before, like singing together, chatting. Like I think it was really nice to be able to facilitate a space where people could connect with each other as easily as they could. And I think that's something that we really like to foster, of just like, even if we weren't there, we want people to just like be able to build really strong relationships. And I think even from that event of the year, like we see people who are doing things together, or like organizing things together from that one time that they met. And it felt like, you know, it's like a birthday party, and you invite all your great friends, and then all your friends get along, and you're like, wow, this is so nice. But with people that we know and people we don't know that well. So it was really beautiful to be able to facilitate spaces like that, where people can just like feel safe and comfortable to just connect with each other.
That event was so gorgeous, and you could really feel the love in the field,
raining down on us.
Literally raining down on every person. I've just realized it's now 1:46. So this is an invitation to anyone in the room. If you've got any questions, now's a chance. But whilst you're thinking, I might just ask one more question, and then we'll, or if there's anything, have there been any questions in the room? I'm just going to check the Q&A. Oh, there has been. Aha, Kate, great question.
Great question.
Kate asks, I love the dynamic between you two. I'm wondering about your experiences of, I think that's stewarding power and hierarchy, and how hierarchy does or doesn't come into your work.
Good question.
Good question.
You
go. Okay. This has been, so there's, it's not, maybe it's insignificant, but there is 12 years between Nonny and I. And very recently we've been reflecting on how before DE, you know, I had like a whole kind of like career sort of a kind of like a hierarchical organizational career, and then came into DE. And we talk a lot about like what that means in terms of what comes into the organization as sort of norms, and actually what needs to be in the organization in relation to like what the work is. And I think that feels really important. The couples counselling is definitely a practice that really helps explore that. And yeah, I think we've recently been reflecting on 2018 to 2020 being like quite traumatic for both of us in like various ways, through like either shared projects we were involved in or just like the organizations we were moving out of. And in part, the sort of creation of DE was a bit of a trauma bond between the two of us, and that sometimes the practice, our responses to different events and externalities, and then with each other, like reflected part of that trauma bond. And so actually like the last 2 years of doing the program has been a process of us trying to like move out of that dynamic, not just with each other, but I think a lot with ourselves. A lot of like internal stories that we have with each other, of each other or of ourselves, that require kind of an external perspective to be able to reflect back on. Today we were talking about how Nonny's an Aries, and my mum is also an Aries, and I have like mummy issues. So like, it's like some interesting psychoanalysis going on there. Like, I think we sort of reflecting on the kind of soulmates thing, and we, you know, that I feel like I'm my other partner in my life, my romantic partner. And by the way, when I talk to some therapists, they get very confused when I say partner, and they're just like, who, work, like what? You know, is my soulmate, but like the relationship takes work, right? You don't just like meet each other perfectly. And I think it's just, being kind of like overt about what you're bringing and like working through it, being able to like check on with each other, and like getting a lot of support. Like we have a lot of community support around us. We have like a lot of relationships that are like beyond the two of us, that support us to be like in alignment with each other. And I also think that like, again, with like any relationship outside of the kind of heteronormative patriarchal, like two people in a couple, it's like essential to have broader accountable relationships around you, so that you don't just get stuck in this kind of like between two people dynamic.
And also I feel like there's something as well about like how, because I feel, there's like this sort of like spiritual element of like the work that we do, because then if we're providing, or we aim to provide healing for people, we should also facilitate the same thing for us as individuals too, who make up the organization. And I feel like that's been something that we think about quite a lot, and just like in terms of like our ancestral lineages of like healing trauma, and like I guess like the narratives that comes with that, and like how that then impacts the types of like liberation work that you can do. And I think that's something that we just speak about quite often, of just like the ways in which the system impacts or like poisons, I guess, the types of work that we might do based off of like these unhealed things. And I was just like, I actually wrote down, it feels like sometimes through our organizing, like we're detoxing like these narratives quite a lot. And I think the other day, Guppi, you said it really well, of just like, we are in quite a good place of just like, we don't do things as organizations should do. So like, we never set up to be like a mainstream organization. We never set up to be like that's not what we do. We just we're practicing in something that's completely different. And as it is different, there's just like a daunting thing of like, how do you do something completely different that you've never done before? Whereas there's like so many like models for how you set up an organization, how you do a board, how you have these types of conversations. But I think for us, it's just kind of been making it up, I guess, which is quite a liberating thing to do, but it's also a bit uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's the reality, isn't it? We are all making it up as we go. But I think what you've both really reiterated again and again is like the healthy relationship that you're building, the relational organizing, the clarity about time reveals the depth of the work, and that there's so much practice that we can lean back on and bridge back towards. I haven't seen any other questions. Oh, Kim's got a question. Okay. Question is, moving past trauma bonds, the work that needs to be put in for accountable partnerships, can you share any practical tips on how to find space to fulfill individual practice and passions, as well as collective practice, in terms of balancing time and emotional seasons and financial independence?
That's a question. So I think I think we are people of a lot of interests. I think we describe ourselves as like geeks. So I feel like we always have like really burning questions that we're both sort of figuring out. And then those questions will then, whilst we figure those out like individually, they also then form a collective practice. It's quite interesting. And it's like, yeah, and I think because we also went into decolonizing economics with specific interests, and like the whole decolonizing economics is like a space where we can explore those things. So yeah, it's like, that's a really good question. But I think, yeah, like how can you have an individual practice without flattening your collective, and how can you have a collective without having the individual? I feel like it's like what's it called? It's like, how do you balance those two things? But I think like, yeah, I don't know. I'm really boggled by that question, because it's such a good question. But I think also what we do to balance those things out is like because we work 2.5 days a week, and then we get asked to do like random things, which is quite fun. Like right now we're in Bucharest to do a 4-day workshop. And like some of those random things that we get asked like sort of fulfill our own individual passions and interests too. So like, we've been asked to do things at art galleries. We've been asked to do things at like, just like at co-ops. We've been asked to do and like facilitate spaces in like a range of different things. And I think each time when we do those things, we figure out one thing for us individually and one thing for our collective practice. And yeah, balancing time and emotional seasons as well. I feel like we are quite, anyone who works with us will know that deadlines are a big question for us. Like we're quite flexible and we're quite adaptable. And also we know that things happen in like peaks and flows. And I think that's something that helps us to be able to balance time, individual interests, and also being a human being in the whole world. And like, how do we, remain flexible to the things that are changing within our lives? And I think currently we're going through like a big change individually and as a pair. And it's been really interesting of just thinking, okay, wow, how are we going to change our weekly meetings? How are we going to change when we meet up in person? And I think we have just quite an adaptable practice, and we're not that rigid. Ask anyone who's ever with us. It's just, we just make it up.
Yeah. I think we also like, not know that we were running a however many 100 people event in July, because from April onwards there were maybe about 3 weeks that Nonny and I were working at the same time. Like I was away most of April, Nonny went on care leave, then I was away again for a week, and there was just like this period where we just weren't really in the same space, but we just kind of picked up for each other, and we had a team around us, so that like made a big difference. And I think it's just that sort of trust and synchronicity around our shared goals feels really important. One thing we didn't mention, I realize we've got 3 minutes, is the organisation it sits within something called the Just Transition Strategy Framework, which we'll share a link for, which is drawn up by Movement Generation. And whilst our work sounds very expansive, and it is, because it kind of attends to like all areas of the economy, when an individual desire to like explore an area comes up, like it's because it fits into that strategy. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, let's experiment with that, or like, let's try that out. And I do think it's also really important for like what Nonny said about, we might have desires for like something to happen, but often we just wait until someone comes and invites us into something before we actually do it. And that's definitely happening more and more, which is really great. We
love being asked to do random things, because that helps us to answer a question that maybe we haven't had capacity to answer until someone this is what would be really interesting to hear from you guys. It's really great. It's like homework.
It is.
I think the balance thing as well, Kim, is such a tricky one, where we need to be really compassionate with, because it's like, at the scale of what, what scale are we seeking the balance? The day, the week, the month, the lifetime? Like, actually, I think if we all look back, if we really trusted our instincts and followed them throughout our life, we'll see that it will be the shape that it will be, because it's shaped by our instinct and our passions, and some balance will fall out of that, because it will just, that's the lay of our life. And not even lifetime, intergenerationally. The kind of healing that we have privilege to do, that was just not accessible to our parents or to our grandparents. My God, the kind of life, the quality of life that we have, the quality of choice that we have, and that has balanced out somehow over generations. We've got a minute left, and I think this is probably a good place to pause the conversation. But thank you so much, Nonny and Guppi. Like, I think the way you describe organizing just makes so much sense. And if there's no vocabulary around it, it's just being in your presence and being at your events and like seeing what you do. That is the evidence that anyone needs, and you are completely visible to the people that you need to be visible to. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you everyone for joining in for this second conversation. And our next one will be with Shayna from Interrupting Criminalization, and they are brilliant. So really do join for that conversation as well. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jalen.
Thank you. Ooh, I love the Capricorns and hearts coming through the chat. Woohoo, Senior. Oh, we've got party horns. I don't know what to call those things. Oh, if anyone's still around, Nonny, name your karaoke song.
Oh God.
Nonny is like a karaoke pusher. So basically, this is the song that we all need to sing to next. Nonny, name it.
I'm just gonna say the one we did at the event of the year. What's it called? Never Too Much.
Amazing. Okay, we'll get that back up. 9 people heard it. 8. We missed everyone else, but